There are so many stories I could tell about my grandpa. I called him right after he lost vision in his right eye, and I asked him, "Grandpa, how are you?" And he said, "Well, Ariel, I've gone blind, but I had a great turtle Sunday at Culvert's, and I've had a good life. I had a beautiful wife for 66 years who gave me beautiful children and grandchildren. I can't complain." I told Grandpa that he was an inspiration to me, how he could lose so graciously, lose his vision, lose his wife, yet still live enjoying what he did have and could do. He told me, he said, "Ariel, you gotta appreciate what you had." I love this. You have to appreciate not only what you have, but what you had. What I had was a grandfather who was my #1 fan. When I visited his home a few weeks ago, I saw a card that I'd written and taped to his desk. It was written just a few years after my grandmother passed, and here's what it says. "Dear Grandpa, happy anniversary. I love you. I love you and Grandma so much. You both are with me in everything that I do. Every time I perform, I think about how you and Grandma have been there for every performance, cheering me on. I'm so grateful for the sense of Grandma's presence with me, and I'm grateful for you here, Grandpa, that I can call you whenever I need a pep talk, that I can rejoice with you in the victories, and how you encourage me in the challenges. I love you, Grandpa, and thank you for everything. Your Sunshine Girl." Grandpa cheered me on with all of the passion that he cheered on the U of M football team. He'd say that I made his chest stick out and keep calm and carry on. He'd chant, "#1 Sunshine Girl, #1 Sunshine Girl. I believe in you. I'm proud of you." He told me that one day he would be in heaven holding my grandma, and both of them would be cheering me on from there. What I had was a grandpa who taught me about grief. My grandfather met my grandmother at the U of M United Methodist Church mixer. He said, "Hey, what's your name?" She said, "Virginia." And he said, "Virginia, isn't that a state?" He saw her at church the next day and invited her to play tennis after he finished his chicken sandwich for lunch. She was awful at tennis, so he said, "Let's go to the movies instead." They went to the movie 3 Coins in the Well, and in the theater, he reached out and he took her hand. The next year, he spent with her in the library while she studied, and he said that my grandmother was the only reason he passed college. Otherwise, he was too busy becoming the intramural sports champion for most sports played. For years, my grandfather wept about anything that reminded him of my grandmother. He told the story of how they met with tears. But later, he would tell the story again joyously and recount it like a great myth or tale. I watched God sanctify my grandfather in his aging and in his grief. What I saw wasn't a despondent pessimism or cold stoicism or blind optimism, but humility. A humility that recognized that everything we have is a gift from God, given to us on loan. In his usual grandpa fashion, he'd say, "I've lost one eye, but I've still got one good eye." And I realized that this was true for more than just Grandpa's vision. One eye, one part of his life was darkness. The grief, the suffering, the loss of my grandmother. But he still had one eye in which he had some partial vision, albeit small. Every time I spoke with him, something would remind him of my grandmother. He'd cry, and as he'd keep talking, slowly he'd move through the tears to the things that he was grateful for. The 66 years they spent together, his children and grandchildren, his health and strength and golf game. He'd always end with, "I'm a lucky guy. I've got one good eye, and I get on and make the most of it." And that's exactly how my grandpa lived. What I had was a grandpa who had a beautiful death. When I tell my friends that my grandfather had a beautiful death, they look at me puzzled, and they say, "What does a beautiful death look like?" I can't answer that in the abstract, but I can speak about my grandfather's death. He had a stroke, and the doctor showed the family the picture of his brain scan and explained that his language center was completely destroyed. At that moment, Grandpa looked up and said, "Go Blue." Well, he couldn't speak, but he could understand, and he communicated with little squeezes of his hand and kisses with his mouth. We brought him home, and we all took turns caring for him. Each person in our family brought something to his dying that the others couldn't, and he brought something out of each person that no one else could. Essentially, my grandpa had his visitation while he was still alive. His friends and family came to visit and said everything they wanted to say to him. His beloved neighbor sat by his side and told him soothing stories and played him hymns. His dear friend came in the morning and would read him the update on the stocks. His caretakers would hold his hands and call him Kimasabi, the Indian word for faithful friend. His great-granddaughter fell asleep in his arms. Each grandchild sat by his side. His daughter cared for him during the day, and his son sat vigil with him at night. My grandpa lay in bed dying for a week, and that time was a gift because it gave us a chance to come to terms with the reality of death. He brought the family together in such a way that there could be healing in our own relationships and reconciliations, and he gave us lots of time for last words. You'd make a last goodbye, and then remember something you forgot to say, and get to try again the next day. On the day he died, I recited back to him the stories that he loved to tell me, the ones that he'd say over and over. We sat together in silence. And then I said, "You know, Grandpa, you don't even need to talk for me to know what you would say. I've heard you my whole life, and I know exactly what you would be saying right now." He smiled. I showed him the pictures that I found around the house. I read him his obituary, and I told him the plans that we had for the funeral, that we were going to do a U of M tailgate party afterwards, and he laughed at that. His pastor called and thanked him for the blessing that he'd been to the church on the waterfront, and also prayed with him. And when his breathing started to change, our whole family gathered around his bedside, and we told Grandpa stories for up to 4 hours or more. Real stories, with all of the good and all of the mischievous. Just loving and praising God for who he was, crying and laughing together. And he heard us, and he understood. I stayed with him that night, and slept next to him in the bed. At 5 a.m, I woke, and I took his hand, and I said, "I love you." I kissed him on the forehead, and I prayed Our Father, which is the prayer he always prayed with my grandmother before he went to sleep. He died in that moment. The morning birds were singing. The night was warm. The sun began to rise. Something happened. I can only describe it by saying that for a second, heaven brushed earth. I felt a tangible sense of peace, that he was still with me in a different way. That my relationship with him wasn't lost, just changed. I will never understand dying, but in that moment, I knew with all of my soul that my grandfather was okay and that he was with God. And mostly, I was just grateful. My grandpa made his death a gift, but it could only be a gift because his life was a gift. It was because he had chosen to invest in his family, in his grandkids, and loved us the way that he did. He died like he lived. And I believe that he continues to live now. I think about it like this. Part of my vision has gone dark, gone blind. I can't see my grandfather in the way that I used to. But like my grandfather, I still have some partial sight in one eye. I see him in all of the things that remind me of him, in the stories he used to tell, in his children and grandchildren, and also in me. As he grieved the death of my grandmother, so I will grieve and miss him, and, in his words, cry like a baby. But I'll also continue to live my life and make him proud. I can't see, but I've got one good eye, and I'm grateful for what I have, which was a grandpa who loved.